Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. This book tells in detail about the Muslim conquest of Spain under the Umayyad Caliphate from 711 AD to 718 AD. The conquest is also known as the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula or the Umayyad conquest of the Visigothic kingdom. This conquest destroyed the Visigothic kingdom and established the Umayyad wilaya of Al-Andalus. It also resulted in the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Muslim rule into Europe. Start of Chapter 14. The Table of Solomon. By June 30, 713, the day on which Musa entered Merida, the southern half of Spain from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean was in Muslim hands. All the principal towns had been occupied, most of them in peace, and were now governed by Muslim officers with the Jews assisting them in local administration. The Christians were left in peace to live their lives according to their own laws and customs. There was no opposition left, and this had been achieved by Musa by sound employment of time and troops, wasting neither, using both with skill and judgment for simultaneous action by separate divisions in different parts of the country. But now it was time to deal with Tariq, to bring that restive subordinate under control and put a bridle on him. Musa had his own victories in Spain to show the world, and if they were not as bloody and as glorious as the victories of Tariq, at least they were sufficient to restore the old man's pride. The resentment which he felt at the successes of Tariq was still the dominant emotion. It hurt Musa, outweighing any feelings of appreciation which might have moved him to kindness. He would put Tariq in his place, and he had the strength of personality to do so. Plus an assurance born of a lifetime spent as a leader of men and a commander of victorious armies. Nearly a month had passed after the conclusion of the siege of Merida, when at the end of July, end of Shaban, Musa began his journey to Toledo. On the way he subdued more towns, the inhabitants of which readily accepted Muslim assurances that they had not come to kill or plunder, but to rule in peace. Sometime in August, Musa arrived at a rendezvous where the two top Muslim generals in Spain were destined to meet. More than 2 years after, they had parted in North Africa. Tariq had been more or less idle ever since he conquered Toledo and cleared all opposition in its vicinity. He bided his time in the old Visigothic capital, impatient to get on but restraining himself. Tariq was wasting his time, remaining inactive through 2 campaigning seasons when he could have taken the northern half of the peninsula, while Musa captured the south. This inactivity was forced on him by Musa, who would not let Tariq move. Musa wished to claim for himself whatever laurels fell to the Muslim lot in the north of Spain. Tariq was not inclined to disregard any more the orders of his superior officer. He had done so when the military situation demanded action without restraint against the enemies of Islam. But now there was no such compulsion, and disobedience of his master's orders could no longer be justified. So Tariq remained idle at Toledo for 18 months, waiting for the coming of Musa and knowing that the meeting would not be a pleasant one. Upon being informed that Musa was on his way to Toledo, Tariq set off from the capital to meet the commander-in-chief en route. He took a few officers and a small escort with him. Traveling faster with his small group than Musa was moving with his large army, he arrived at the halfway between Merida and Toledo before Musa. This was the town of Almaraz in the district of Talavera, the rendezvous. At Almaraz, the two generals met. Out of reverence for the chief, Tariq dismounted from his horse and advanced on foot. He was calm and collected, a look of respectful welcome on his face. Musa sat motionless on his horse, watching the approaching Berber, his hand gripping the handle of his whip. He had made no secret of his hostility to Tariq and made no effort to conceal it now. His anger showed in his face. As Tariq got to him, Musa raised his whip and struck him on the head. Tariq took the blow without flinching. Musa then broke into a tirade against his subordinate. He heaped abuse upon him, severely upbraided him for offences allegedly committed, disregard for his commander's instructions, even disobedience of his commander's orders. Then, talking a little more calmly, he asked, "Why did you enter and penetrate the land without my orders? I only sent you to make a foray and then return." Tariq did his best to pacify the angry old man. After a brief account of the operations carried out by him and the spoils gathered, he explained that he had done all this as a service to Islam, and in the belief that had Musa been acquainted with the exact circumstances prevailing in Spain, he would have ordered him to act in no other way. Tariq concluded, "I am only one of your subordinate commanders. Whatever I have gained and conquered is ascribed to you and is counted against your achievements." Musa listened attentively, but made no reply. He chose to postpone further actions until after they had got to Toledo. When they got to Toledo, Musa installed himself in the Visigothic palace as ruler of Spain. Here he demanded of Tariq all the spoils won by him in war, that is the fifth which was the share of the state. 4/5 have been already distributed among the soldiers. He also called for the treasures of kings which had fallen into Tariq's hands at Toledo, and the fabulous table of Solomon which Tariq had found at Almeida soon after the fall of the Gothic capital. There are fantastic accounts of this table. It was believed to be the table of Solomon, brought from Jerusalem by the mythical Ashban, the first king of Spain who built Seville and after whom Spain itself was named by the Arabs as Ashbania. Other sources said that while originally at Jerusalem, the table had been in Egypt when Amr bin al-As radiallahu ta'ala anhu invaded that country in 639. The priests were able to get it away to Alexandria just before the fall of Babylon and Memphis. Soon after that, as Amr advanced to Alexandria, the priests transported it to Tripoli, then to Carthage, then to Toledo, always keeping one jump ahead of the advancing Muslims. At Toledo it had remained ever since. Its description varied with the source describing it. Some said it was green in color with sides and legs, 365 in number, made of solid emerald. Others said it was made of gold and silver, having around it a row of pearls, another of rubies and a third of emeralds, besides being strewn with innumerable precious stones. According to yet others, its substance was solid emerald, while the whole of it was covered with inscriptions in Greek. There are other descriptions still which need not burden this narrative. The true origin and correct description of the table is given by Ibn Hayyan, as quoted by Makari and translated by Gayan Gos. The celebrated table which Tariq found at Toledo, although attributed to Suleiman and named after him, never belonged to that prophet, according to the barbarian authors who give it the following origin. They say that in the time of their ancient kings it was customary amongst them for every man of estimation and wealth to bequeath. From the money so collected the priests caused tables to be made of pure gold and silver. Besides thrones and huge stands for the priests, deacons and attendants to carry the gospels when taken out at public processions, or to ornament the altars on great festivals. By means of such bequests this table was wrought at Toledo, and was afterwards emulously increased and embellished by each succeeding monarch, the last trying always to surpass his predecessors in magnificence, until it became the most splendid and costly jewel that ever was made for such a purpose, and acquired great celebrity. The fabric was of pure gold, set with the most precious pearls, rubies, and emeralds. Around it was a row of each of these valuable stones, and the whole table was besides covered by jewels so large and bright that never did human eye behold anything comparable to it. Toledo being the capital of the kingdom, There was no jewel, however costly, which could not be procured in it. This and the other causes concurred to ornament and embellish that inestimable object. When the Muslims entered Toledo, it was found on the great altar of their principal church, and the fact of such a treasure having been discovered soon became public. This was the fabulous table which, along with other treasures, Musa demanded of his subordinate. If there ever had been trust in Tariq's mind with regard to Musa's intentions, it had by now vanished. He was shrewd enough to guess Musa's purpose, which was to claim the table as one of his own conquests. Not willing to let the commander-in-chief get away with such a claim, Tariq had one of its forelegs removed and concealed it among his own belongings. The table with the remaining 3 legs was then brought before Musa. When Musa had got over his amazement at the dazzling prize placed before him, he asked Tariq what had happened to the 4th leg of the table. "I know not," replied Tariq innocently. "This is how I found it." And such was the love and confidence which the Berber general inspired in his soldiers, that not one man gave him away or even hinted that he had seen the table with 4 legs. Musa had another leg fashioned of gold and fixed to the table. It was a beautifully finished work which did credit to its maker, but it was obviously different. Musa had got what he wanted. He now had Tariq put in fetters and thrown into prison, meanwhile letting it be known that he intended to have Tariq executed for disobedience of orders. This led to deep resentment among the Berber tribes which comprised the army of Tariq. They rightly felt that after all the bloodshed and all the victories gained against the toughest Gothic resistance, they and their chief deserved better treatment. But discipline and loyalty precluded any outward expression of insubordination or disobedience. It speaks volumes for the nobility of character of Tariq that he accepted his undeserved punishment and humiliation without rebelling against it. He could have defied his commander-in-chief. At a word from his Berber troops would have risen against the Arabs, as their sons were to do a generation later. Musa was not an adversary to be taken lightly. Indeed, he was a most formidable opponent. Nevertheless, Tariq, as a brilliant leader in battle at the head of his battle-hardened Berber veterans, would at least have held his own against Musa, whose Arab troops were at this time probably not more numerous than the Berbers. Such a confrontation would have shaken the foundations of Islam in the West, with consequences altogether catastrophic to the new faith. However, this did not happen, thanks to Tariq's devotion to Islam, his discipline, and his willingness to sacrifice his personal interests to the larger interests of Islam. He bore the injustice and the ill-treatment with fortitude. Mughis al-Rumi, an outspoken man who had little love for Musa, interceded on Tariq's behalf. He recounted the victories which the Berber general had gained and the services which he had rendered to Islam, for which he deserved honors and not abuse. But the pleas of Mughis fell on deaf ears. About now, Musa decided to send a delegation to Damascus to give Caliph al-Walid an account of the war in Spain, highlighting his own achievements at the expense of Tariq. As leader of the delegation, he appointed the old venerable Ali bin Rabah, who was a tabi, follower of a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and like Musa, came from the Iraqi tribe of Lakhm. Mughis also asked to join the delegation so that he could see his old friend and master al-Walid, and since his close relations with the Caliph were well known, the request could not be refused. Tariq heard about the delegation going to Damascus. He also heard that Mughis was going with it. In this he saw a ray of hope. He sent a request to his erstwhile subordinate to put his case before the Caliph, to let him know that it was he who had conquered Spain, and that Musa had imprisoned him and contemplated his death. He promised to give Mughis 100 slaves if he succeeded in getting him out of this predicament. Before leaving Toledo, Mughis made sure that Tariq would not come to harm during his absence. He said to Musa, "Do not make haste in the matter of Tariq. You have enemies. The commander of the faithful has come to know about him, and I fear for you from his anger." The warning was sufficient to stay Musa's hand. When the delegation arrived at Damascus, Maurice told the whole story to the Caliph. The conquest of Spain by Tariq, the envy of Musa, how Musa had imprisoned Tariq, and what Musa had in mind about killing him. Maurice had a lot to tell, and with his eloquence he told it beautifully. He clearly stood up for Tariq in his dispute with Musa. This was not necessarily because of any love for Tariq, but the reader will know more about this triangular relationship in a later chapter. The Caliph wrote a strong letter to Musa. He warned him against any action harmful to Tariq and ordered his reinstatement to his original command. "Do not render useless," wrote the Caliph, "one of the best swords of Islam. According to one account, Al-Walid even threatened Musa. If you whip him, I shall whip you. If you kill him, I shall kill your son." The winter had almost passed when the courier carrying the Caliph's letter arrived at Damascus. The orders of the Caliph were obeyed without delay. Tariq was released from prison and reinstated. The troops rejoiced at his deliverance, happy that justice had been done and Tariq was back in a position of honor and authority. To all appearances, there was a full reconciliation between the two generals, which manifested itself in a show of mutual friendship and confidence as they went on together to new conquests. But neither the Arab nor the Berber forgives. The hostility between these two fine and able generals was to simmer beneath the surface until the following year, when accounts were settled. End of chapter 14.